Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Harris Piccirilli, and I am a gallery manager and curatorial intern here at Alpha Art Gallery. I am joined by artist Stella Chang, who will be presenting work in our upcoming 2024 Watercolor and Mixed Media exhibition. Stella Chang is an accomplished artist who currently resides in New Jersey. Thank you, Stella, for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me here today.
Of course, we're so glad to have you here with us today. I guess let's just get into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
To start off, can you just provide us with some insight on your artistic background, maybe education, how you got into art on a general aspect?
Sure. So I've always doodled since I was a very, very little kid. According to my grandma, like when I was 2.5, when I was able to hold a pen, I started doodling and never really stopped. And I spent about 10 years growing up in Taiwan. That's where my family is originally from. I was born in San Jose. And one day my family was just like, you got to learn Chinese. So let's just go back. So they sent me back. And as you know, so I was a kid of the 90s. Now you know how old I am. So in the 90s, it was the glorious time of animation, Japanese animation and manga. And obviously, being an artistic kid, I was just like, this is what I wanted to do. I want to become a Japanese manga artist or comic book artist. So I never stopped doodle. I came back to the States when I was 14. Somewhere in between, I ended up in Canada for 4 years, but I came back when I was 14. And I pretty much went to NYU for studio art because I wanted to become an illustrator. But just like probably a gazillion, graduates with a fine art, degree, I couldn't get a job when I graduated. So yeah, that was pretty much the beginning of me realizing it's not that easy being an artist. And but I needed a job immediately because my family was actually going through a really hard time, financial hard time. So I took the very first job offer I had, which was from the fashion industry. So instead of being an artist, I ended up becoming a handbag and accessory designer for the last 20 years.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. I'm just like, woo, did a huge detour.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Like,
but yeah, there were aspects of creativity that I really enjoy. So I say to myself, fine, I'll just compromise. And it did train me in a lot of different skills like business, product development, management. Yeah. So what ended up happening was, I'm like literally fast forward 20 years. 3 years ago, I ended up getting really sick, not COVID, but unfortunately it still is lupus. That pretty much killed my fashion career overnight. Like literally did. And I wrap up my business and then what? I was still in my 30s and I'm just like, my life doesn't end now. I need to do something. And then it was a really difficult time, not just physically but also mentally, because all of a sudden I lost my entire identity wrapped around fashion. I lost a way of living. I lost my income. I have nothing. And I almost feel like when people, experience that type of life-changing losses, they kind of default to something they know instinctively. And for me, it was art. I just started painting.
mhm.
And up to this point, I have not touched a brush for at least 10 years. I have not done any paintings for 10 years. I have zero portfolio. I had nothing, literally nothing. And during this time, I also did not have a diagnosis. So I have no treatment. So I was literally navigating through inflammation nonstop, flare-ups nonstop, in between finding a time to just paint. And next thing I knew, I'm back in the arts. So yeah, any questions?
Wow, that's an amazing journey to hear of. And so were those some of the challenges you kind of faced when transitioning from a fashion career to becoming a full-time artist? Was lupus, when did you find out your diagnosis, or was it that like the main challenge, when transitioning such a dramatic career change?
There were actually lupus was part of it, but it was more multifaceted. First of all, to answer your question, I literally got a diagnosis last year, August of last year. So literally just 1 year ago. So I've only been on the medication for about a year. That's why I'm
Mhm.
still kind of, there's still a lot of ups and downs. In terms of the challenges, there were many. First of all, the physical aspect of, not being able to do a lot of things now, and having to only kind of work around the inflammations, that was really, really hard. And that is still very hard. But the flexibility of being an artist actually allowed me to like get up when I can get up, work when I can work, and then just, take a nap when I need to take a nap. And so that's actually very helpful. But this might be kind of funny, but and two more challenges that I did not expect um, is how unstructured the art industry is. There's no formula to
No.
how to do it. Like everyone does it differently, and it doesn't always work. Just because someone, somebody else finds that this works for him or her, it doesn't work for me.
Mhm.
And so that's challenge number one. I'm still trying to figure it out. Challenge number two is people don't like to talk about business in the art world. Like I found, at least for me, it's people gets all weird when I start to ask about how do you price this? The money part. It's like people
Yes.
get kind of strange about that.
Mhm.
And that's very different from fashion. Because in fashion, I know exactly what my profit margin is I had to hit. So I know exactly what my cost of goods need to be. And I have no problem negotiating with people. But then in the art world, people get kind of weird. They're like, whoa, whoa, hold on. No, 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 no. We're gonna talk about inspiration.
I never would have thought that, especially since the arts community isn't one for you wouldn't think that the arts community is very known for sometimes struggling a bit when it comes to the money aspect,
Yeah.
or artists struggling a little bit trying to get their art out there, trying to get it sold for a
Yeah.
reasonable price that really showcases the work that they put into a piece. So that's very
Right.
significant to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I'm still a little bit shocked. And I just to share with you a little bit, the probably one of the worst comments I heard from another artist, it was actually advice that he received. And it was go find a full-time job so you don't have to think about money when you paint.
Mm.
And I was like, wait, but why can't you make a living out of being an artist?
Mhm.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just gonna leave it there because I'm sure this is already a little bit controversial for a lot of listeners or viewers. So there's that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Going into more of your chronic illness, do you mind,
Yeah.
sharing a little bit just for viewers who may not know what lupus is or what like side effects or what effects that you experience with the
Oh,
with chronic illness? Do you mind going
sure.
about that?
So lupus is basically an autoimmune disease, which means that for whatever reason, they don't really know the reasons yet. They have, their suspicions. So basically, your own immune system, for some reasons, attack yourself. And lupus is actually known as the disease with 1,000 faces because per patient, it shows up differently. All of our symptoms are across the board. So it's actually systemic. Like for me in particular, I have symptoms that resemble myositis, which means inflammation of the muscles. So when my immune system gets activated, it attacks my major muscle groups. So I'm talking about both my arms, my thighs. I also get a lot of skin rashes all over my face, and the signature butterfly rash. I also have that now, unfortunately. And then for some reason, again, the medical field is still trying to understand why this happens. A lot of lupus patients struggle with photosensitivity, which I also have now. And so I pretty much, when I go out, it's like I have my entire vampire get up. It's not even a joke at this point. I have my big hat on, SPF 50 up to 80, covered up everything. So it's kind of insane. And so when you have an attack, it's called flare up.
Okay.
uh, Basically your immune system goes haywire. It could be triggered by, like I said, sunlight, UV ray. It could be triggered by mental stress, physical stress. Like I can't even exercise now because my body perceived that as an attack. And my immune system goes haywire. It started just attacking my muscles and my joints and my skin. So I literally kind of freeze up, and my muscle will inflame to the point where I had to sleep with ice bags because it's so painful and I can't touch it. And then my skin literally will change its texture. So my whole body shuts down. But I'm actually on the better end of the spectrum as a lupus patient. Do you know Selena Gomez?
Yes, I do.
Okay, she has lupus too, but hers is in remission because she ended up having to get chemotherapy to destroy half of her immune system. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No,
And
I
the
am not.
reason, yeah, the reason why she has to go that far is because unfortunately, lupus is also known to attack organs. Like kidney is number one,
Yes.
sometimes liver, lungs, heart. So a lot of lupus patients, especially the ones who suffer with organ attacks, that's what I call it. I'm sure there's a medical term for that.
Mhm.
They're the first ones to go. How can you live with without your kidney? And it's
Right.
horrendous. And so I count myself lucky. And that's the reason why that's when they had to, use chemotherapy, which is considered like the last resort. Before that, we are put on immunosuppressant drugs to kind of bring down our immune system's response. But that in itself has a lot of side effects. Like I was on one for 3 months. I literally felt like I was on the sea for 3 months. Like the nausea was 24/7. And so January and March, I was on one. I had to be taken off of it because I also developed suicidal ideation. Literally, thoughts will come into my head and I couldn't navigate. Yeah,
Well, I'm so sorry that that's you've been going through that part of the journey, but it's admirable that you have such positive, kind of outlook, silver linings
I
on.
appreciate that. Yeah, first of all, I'm not the only one. And like I said, there are a lot of us out there and it's a very well studied disease. I hate to say it. So, in a way, the silver lining is we have a lot of treatment choices and drugs that we can use, but it's definitely not easy.
No, definitely not. But thank you
Yeah.
for giving us some like overview on that, just for any viewers who were, unaware of what lupus was. And, just getting into lupus and, your art, how do you feel that lupus has shaped your perspective on art and how is it like reflected in it? And also I read in your biography, which I thought was really, really interesting, that you talk about a Japanese practice called kintsugi. And I was wondering how that practice also contributes to its work because it may be correlated in some way.
Yeah, yeah. So that's such a big question, and just like many different answers to it. So
You can
I'll
the
do my
answer the first
best.
part, like how lupus,
Yeah,
shaped your perspective
yeah,
on art and how
yeah,
it's reflected in your work maybe.
yeah. So before I even talk about lupus, I had to kind of like rewind a little bit and talk about fashion because like for 20 years in fashion, we learned to create beauty so
Mhm.
that people will buy. It's a very consumeristic product, obviously non-essential, but we want people to buy. It makes you feel good. So so my entire training, aesthetic training and visual training for 20 years was all about creating beauty that people want to spend money on. All of a sudden, lupus came and wiped that whole thing out, meaning that okay, physically I'm a mess, I'm a hot mess, mentally I'm also a hot mess. I don't know how to create beauty anymore. What does beauty even mean in the face of illness? That's not going to go away because I still had to live with my immune system on a daily basis. I can't completely get rid of it, then I'll die of all sorts of other things, you know. So there was a lot of soul searching when I realized that approaching life and approaching art by trying to recreate beauty is very limited. And somewhere in between, that was when I came across the concept, the Japanese concept kintsugi, which basically for anyone who's a potter or like who creates a sculpture, you know what this is. The Japanese have a way of not throwing away anything. And so when there's a broken piece of pottery, it doesn't matter what it is, it could be a teapot, it could be a plate. The master craftsman will literally use liquid silver and liquid gold to seal the broken parts of it. And the liquid silver and gold ends up creating this beautiful striation in silver or gold as part of that broken pottery. And that imperfection, that brokenness ends up becoming part of this play, the history of the play, and the service of the play, or teapot, whatever. And so that imperfection ends up becoming part of art. And I watched an NHK documentary about this, and I was so moved by it. And that was when I realized, this is how my approach should be about life, which is embracing the totality of it, including the perfection, the imperfection, because that's what really life is about. It's not just about what's really pretty. Let me put it on the wall. It's like, come on. I mean, that's one aspect of it. So that kind of ends up becoming, you know, my reason of being, I suppose. Yeah, as an artist.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Wow. That was really, really interesting to hear. And I never knew about that practice, that kintsugi, and I looked it up and it was amazing to see.
Yeah,
So
it's beautiful.
I bet.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes the way they fix it end up becoming even more beautiful than the original product. I'm like, oh, hey.
Exactly. Some of them had like gold that they fixed it with,
Yeah,
makes it according to like an article that I read, like in theory more valuable, like the broken like
yeah.
more valuable. So that was very interesting to look and think about. Thank you for sharing that with us.
No
Um
problem. Yeah.
Moving on to like more of your different mediums in your art, I read that you use different mediums such as watercolor, ink, digital rendering, and 3D printing. How do these different techniques help you convey your narrative of imperfection and beauty? How do they like work together to create?
Uh, it's so interesting. When I got this question, I was like, how do I even answer this? Because it just happened. Yeah, well, first of all, the way I see using, such a mixed media approach to create anything, they're just techniques.
Hmm.
There's no magic behind it. And I never fully understand why, like as artists, we try to cap our curiosity by using only one way of doing one thing or two things. I mean, we should all have the curiosity to try different things because the process, let's say, of using watercolor versus the process of using digital rendering are so different. It actually, each process influence our perception and our approach to art, you know, completely differently. Like neurologically, it actually changes us, how we look at, let's say, our subject. So basically what I'm trying to say is that when you use so many different techniques, you're actually training your brain and your eye-hand-eye coordination to look at your subject from all sorts of different angles. Just the act itself is forcing your eyes to look at things differently. And the reason why I'm very big on that is because this is probably more like a echo to my Chinese background, which is a subject is multifaceted.
Hmm.
You cannot just look at it head on. You have to be able to look at it as 360 from different, perspectives, from different angles. And what I found is that when you use different techniques, it kind of mimics that. You're looking at the subject from all sorts of different angles. For instance, when I use 3D rendering, I realized I can create hyper realistic, skin texture. But I can't really do that with watercolor because watercolor does the watercolor thing. It's never going to look like a 3D render skin texture. you know? And so then I realized, whoa, what if I merged a 3D skin texture together with my watercolor, let's say in Photoshop or in any type of 3D program, what will happen to that subject? Now you're offering two different views of the same subject to the viewer, and that actually allows the viewer, at least in my opinion, to go into your subject in a much more interesting way versus just one linear directional way.
Yes. Okay. Wow. You kind
Yeah, if any of that makes any sense.
No, it does, it does. You kind of touched into this a little bit, kind of like your initial process, maybe when choosing which medium to use. Can you
Yeah.
like go through um like your whole creative process when thinking, oh, does it just start with like a lot of questions like, do I want it to be this texture? Do I want it to look like this? And that's how you decide what medium you use?
Not really.
Oh,
I
okay.
am so not procedural. Maybe that's why I'm not a teacher because I can't really break it down into like individual
No,
steps.
no, no.
But so the way the whole thing starts is I don't know if you ever heard of the term the mind's eye. So yeah, this is kind of going back to my culture again. So um I didn't even realize how heavily influenced I am by Chinese culture until like I became an artist. So in Chinese culture, we have a belief that there is what your physical eyes see and there's what your mind's eyes see. So people who sees with their physical eyes, most of them become like they paint in realism. They paint what they see. Nothing wrong with that. That's just their method. But when you see with your mind's eye, you can close your eyes and you see imageries and they just keep coming. You can't stop them. It might be some sort of mental illness. I don't know, but a lot of us do that. Yeah, so I paint with my mind's eye. So I literally, as I'm talking to you, sometimes I don't see you. I start seeing images coming in.
Hmm.
And I try to capture one or two images. And depending on which image actually comes in, that's when I will have an instinct that says, okay, that needs to be done via acrylic on
Yeah.
glass, or
Hmm.
that should be a watercolor. And I start analyzing that image. So a lot of times I look like I'm spacing out. So, even as I'm talking to you or some other people, because I'm trying to capture the images behind
Yeah.
my eyes in my mind. And
It's
then
more like a superpower than
I don't know if this is
illness,
just
in my
I'm sure
opinion.
I'm sure if you ever have any, let's say a psychologist or whoever, a doctor listening in, I'm sure they'll be like, we need to put her on something, but whatever. Yeah, so that's pretty much how it works for me. And I know a lot of artists work like that. They just have that instinct. They see it, they're like, okay, let's try this. And or it's the digital rendering that works here. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really cool to learn about. I didn't know that that was a thing, but the mind's eye, that's very, very, very cool. Very much of superpower, if you ask me.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, that's why I could never do commission portraiture unless you want purple hair, then that's what will happen. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe getting into our last few questions. Um, when viewers look at your work, what do you hope that they take away from your art, especially in terms of embracing imperfections and fighting beauty and flaws?
Well, I hope they just take a moment, maybe between a breath or two, they're able to kind of like just experience the art. And then whatever they take away is really up to them. Like I'm not one of those artists who have to have a very strong, well, okay, no, let me rephrase that. So I'm not very set in this painting has this one message. You have to get it. That's not how I work because, like I said, I approach the subject from so many different angles using so many different techniques. I'm more interested to learn what do you see in it?
Yes.
Because
Hmm.
everyone sees completely different things. Like I had one person coming and said, "Oh my gosh, you're talking about the different levels of consciousness." I'm like, "I am? Sure. Tell me more about it."
I'd love to hear what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I'm like, "Okay."
Really
Maybe there
cool
is that,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Mhm. It's really cool to see kind of how different minds work. So,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then coming with our final question, with your creative process now grounded in the quote, that you said, I think from your artist statement, imagination is only the limitation, which I guess kind of relates to what we were saying previously with the last question. What
Mhm.
future projects or themes are you excited to explore in your art? Or is there any upcoming events that you may want to share about?
I am always in a lot of events. So, but what I'm trying to do, so just like pay attention to my website, you'll see what's coming out or my Instagram. But what I'm actually really excited to share is that I am going back into creating interactive installation pieces.
Oh.
Yeah, because I've been working on paper for so long, or like, on metal, aluminum metal, or on like acrylic glass. And one day it occurred to me, why don't I make them into pieces that people can touch and feel and play around and put them together, in a gallery or museum setting? Because I'm one of those people who's very tactile. I had to touch things, and I just felt like most of us only create art that's for the eyes,
Mhm.
but what about for the hands, or and that in itself kind of like stimulates the brain differently. So stay tuned on
Oh, that
that.
sounds so interesting. I wanna go.
Oh,
Um,
good. Awesome.
I'll pay attention to your website.
Thank
But that sounds really interesting. I'm very excited for you in the future.
you.
Um, yeah. Well, okay, thank you, Stella. I think those are all the questions that I have for you today. Thank you for taking the time to join us again. We really liked having you here.
Thank you.
Um, For our viewers, please join us for our physical and virtual watercolor and mixed media exhibition this year on November 15th and 14th. Thank you for tuning in.
All right, thank you. Bye.